What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burtonette. In today's episode, I'm going to be going over my top 5 games in the Big Ten this season. The last couple of videos, especially the Big 12 one, have done pretty well. They've certainly gotten out there, but in this video, I'm going to be going over the Big Ten, one of the two super conferences, if you want to call it that, in college football. So before I get into it, though, before I reveal my top 5 games, maybe some other ones I'm interested in, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I upload. But the Big Ten, looking over this slate, I'm going to group a bunch of games together in my number 5 spot because there is going to be a showcase of Big Ten football, and that'll come in Week 7. One of the games that week is Michigan at USC. It was an interesting game this past season that Khalil Mullings got a late touchdown in to put the Wolverines in front and give them the win early in the 2024 season. The winner this year in 2025 will show that they're in the Big Ten race, while the loser will most likely be out. This is not a conference where you can afford to drop probably more than one game, maybe a team with 2 losses can get in if it's super competitive this year, but more than likely you get more than one loss and you're out of making the Big Ten championship game. Both of these teams overall were disappointments last year. That's been the story for USC for a few years now, really for arguably the last couple of decades. And then for Michigan, though, they did kind of reconcile what was, a step back of a season, which was kind of expected, let's be honest, with a very strong finish, beating Ohio State and beating Alabama. So Michigan's coming into the season with all the momentum. They've got Bryce Underwood, the freshman quarterback, and, they've got the pieces around him. They're always going to have a good defense. Sharon Moore is more familiar as the head coach, and so I think the Michigan Wolverines are going to be pretty solid this year. Another interesting game in Week 7 is Ohio State at Illinois. Now, this is interesting because it's the defending champs against a team that is very much rising. The rising Illini is what I'm going to be calling them, I guess. And the question here, will this be a repeat of 2007? That year was in Columbus, and the Buckeyes got beat by the Illini. And so this will be a big chance for Brett Bielema and for his squad in Champaign to pull a huge upset over an Ohio State team that, barring an early upset, is certainly going to be in the top 5, if not ranked as the top team in the country. So that's a big game. Another interesting one, Indiana at Oregon. Based on last season, this is one of the best games in the Big Ten schedule. I think it's going to be interesting to see how both of these teams do. I think it's possible both see a little bit of a drop back. I don't think either one of these teams are going to be like TCU levels of a drop-off after really good seasons, but I think Indiana is certainly a contender for that. So the question here is, can they hold on to last year's historical success, or will it just be a blip? And then for the Ducks, will they prove themselves as early conference contenders? The winners this week are going to be, especially of these 3 games, there's one more I'm going to briefly mention. The winners of these 3 games are going to be the teams that are most likely the front runners, unless they had already lost earlier in the conference schedule. And out of these games, just taking an early look, probably Michigan and Ohio State emerge as victors, and I think Oregon as well. But I do think these will still be interesting games to watch. And then finally, Iowa at Wisconsin, the battle for the Heartland Trophy. This is, traditional classic Big Ten football. I actually, a few years ago now, got to go to the Wisconsin-Iowa game, and it was, as you might have expected, a defensive showdown, and that's what we can expect here. Wisconsin leads the all-time series 49-47 with 2 ties. I think it'll be interesting to see how Mark Gronowski, the transfer from South Dakota State, does for Iowa this year, and if he's able to kind of boost that offense a little bit higher than where they've been at. Coming in at number 4 is USC at Oregon in Week 13. Now, by this point in the season, they very well might be out of the Big Ten picture, the Trojans. But this would be a game where they could finally get a breakthrough. And that's the question here that intrigues me is, can the Trojans finally get a breakthrough, or will they already be long gone out of the Big Ten race? That Week 7 game at home against Michigan will go a long way in deciding that. But but they're a huge brand of college football, and this will be a chance. And then for Oregon as well, this is their last real test. I'll talk about another one they have earlier in the season up in my next point, but this is, coming in at number 4, and I think it should be an interesting game because I do think you would expect USC to progress a little bit more, and I think Oregon maybe takes a slight step back, but I do think the Ducks are, one of those top 4 teams in the Big Ten again this year. And that gets right into those top 4 teams. And my top 3 games are all kind of interchangeable because I think all of these games are just as significant. If anything, they're significant in order of when they happen, just because the last game of these will potentially decide who makes it to the Big Ten championship for the simple fact that it's the last one to happen. So starting with week 5, this is a big early game to show which one of these teams is going to be in the Big Ten championship game race. The loser won't be out, but they're going to have to pretty much go perfect the rest of the way. This is Penn State at Oregon. Out of these 2 teams, looking at the rest of their schedule, I don't see more than one more loss. So the winner of this game, barring a surprising upset, is likely going to the Big Ten championship game. And I think the winner of this game will be one of the representatives in the Big Ten championship game. I don't think both of these teams get there, especially Penn State, but I think Oregon, in those games that I mentioned, has a little bit of a potential to lose one of those. But I do think the winner of this game, even if they slip up some other time in the season, have a really good shot to get to the Big Ten championship game. So then, week 10, this is the big one for Penn State. Even if they lost that game at Oregon, this is a chance for them to rebound and potentially still get to the Big Ten championship game. If they lost that game if they won that game against Oregon, then they're kind of in the driver's seat, and this is a chance to prove that they can finally beat Ohio State. I don't believe Michigan is on their schedule this year, so this would be a good chance to prove it. On paper, I think Penn State is the favorite. They have that recipe I've talked about I think in previous videos, how they have their starting quarterback coming back. They have that tandem at running back coming back. They got guys all over the field that are returning this season. But for the Nittany Lions, the tough thing is their 2 biggest games this season are both on the road. So that will be tough. I think I'd expect them to lose at least one of them. I certainly don't expect them to win both, though that veteran experience will go a long way in making that a possibility. Finally, week 14, probably going into this video, you knew what to expect here. In terms of the billing going into it, last year this game was not as big, but because of the result, it was. And that's, of course, the game, Ohio State and Michigan. There's not much that needs to be said about the importance of this game for both of these 2 teams, but I do think this is the other game that will decide who gets to the Big Ten championship game, the winner of this one. I think Oregon or Penn State, I'm not ready to make that decision quite yet, though I would say I lean Penn State. That game on the road is what kind of gives me more hesitation, though, at Autzen Stadium. That'll be one team. And then I think it's Ohio State or Michigan. Ohio State's got some tough tests. I mean, these teams have a tough road test the same week in week 7 that I mentioned earlier. If they can get past that, I think the rest of their schedules line up. I mean, obviously, Ohio State has probably the toughest non-conference game this season, welcoming Texas to the Horseshoe in week 1. That'll be a game I talk about in another video when I go over my top non-conference games of the season. But this one right here is a big one. Outside of that USC game, it's kind of weird to say that it's such a given that Michigan is going to go, undefeated outside of that game. That's the only one that really gives me any pause, but I really do. I think Michigan's got a pretty favorable schedule this upcoming season, and I think as long as they get past the Trojans in week 7, they're coming into this game with at most 1 loss. So this is going to be a game, and I think Ohio State's pretty much the same. Really, the only ones that give me any hesitation is Illinois and then Penn State. I don't see them losing both of those, if any. Texas is where it's interesting, but that doesn't affect the Big Ten race for Ohio State. So that one, regardless, if Ohio State has 1 loss but it's out of conference, then this game is obviously very important. Or even if they have 2 losses, 1 in conference, this game is still just as important. So, long story short, the winner of this game, I believe, will be the Big Ten champion in the Big Ten championship game. So it's either Penn State or Oregon going up against Ohio State or Michigan. That is my expectation. And if I had to give my early call, I would go with Penn State against Michigan. Now, where this gets mixed up is a three-way tie. I think the interesting thing is I could very well see this being a four-way tie at the top. I could see maybe Oregon losing to Penn State, but that's their only loss in the Big Ten, and Penn State losing to Ohio State again, and Michigan beating Ohio State. Out of these teams, with the results that I think are going to happen, which if I had to predict now, way too early, I would say Penn State wins at Autzen Stadium, Ohio State wins over the Nittany Lions, and then Michigan wins over the Buckeyes. That would leave Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State with one loss. In my projections, I really, right now, way too early, think Michigan can run the table. So that'd be a three-way tie then, Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon. And I guess the tiebreaker, Penn State would go 1-1 against those teams. Ohio State would be 1-0, and Oregon would be 0-1. So I think that would mean Ohio State would go to the Big Ten championship game, and they'd match up against the Wolverines. But I think for Penn State, that could almost favor them like it did for the Buckeyes this year, where they don't got to play in that Big Ten championship game. They maybe even get a favorable first-round matchup and can potentially get their way to the national championship game. But that's all for this episode of College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burnett, signing out. Peace.